I never really thought of myself as someone who had secrets worth telling, because my life always felt too ordinary for anything meaningful to hide behind it, but there is one moment I keep coming back to, not because it was dramatic, but because it quietly changed the way I see everything that happened before it. It started on a completely normal evening, the kind that doesn't stand out in any way, when I came home from work feeling tired in a very familiar way, not overwhelmed, just drained, like my thoughts were moving slower than my body, and all I wanted was to be inside my apartment where nothing was expected from me anymore. I remember walking down the hallway and thinking about small things, like whether I had anything left in the fridge, whether I should answer a message I had ignored earlier, whether I should just lie down for a while before doing anything else, because everything felt simple and predictable at that point. When I reached my door, I stopped for no real reason at first. I stood there with my keys in my hand, just looking at it like I had done hundreds of times before, and I remember thinking how strange it is that we can pass the same place every day and never really see it, until one moment suddenly feels slightly different, even if you can't explain why. At first, I told myself I was just tired, because that is usually the easiest explanation for anything that feels slightly off, but I still didn't immediately unlock the door. I just stood there a little longer than usual, listening to the hallway. And that's when I noticed the silence. Not normal silence, but a kind of silence that felt complete in a way that made me more aware of my own presence, like even the small background sounds of the building were missing, and I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable without knowing why. I finally placed the key in the lock, but before turning it, I paused again. And in that pause, I heard something from inside my apartment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. It was just a small, simple sound, like something shifting very slightly, or maybe touching something, but it was enough to make me stop completely, because I live alone, and there was no reason for anything to be moving inside. For a few seconds, I just stood there trying to make sense of it, trying to find a normal explanation, like maybe I had left a window open, or maybe it was just the building settling, or maybe I was imagining it because I was already tired. But none of those explanations felt strong enough to replace what I had heard. I slowly pulled my hand away from the door handle. And I took one step back. Not because I decided to, but because my body did it before I had fully processed what was happening. I remember staring at the door at that moment, trying to decide whether I should leave, or call someone, or just open it and end the uncertainty, because uncertainty was suddenly worse than fear. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. Don't open the door yet. I remember reading it twice, not because it was unclear, but because I needed to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it, and for a moment I even thought it might be a mistake, something sent to the wrong person, but the timing made it feel too connected to ignore. I looked back at the door again. And I realized I was now fully aware of every detail around it, the handle, the lock, the small gap under it. Everything suddenly felt more present than it should have. And then I noticed something that made my breathing slow down. The door wasn't completely still. There was a very small pressure from the inside, so slight that I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but it was enough to suggest that something had tested it from the other side. Not forcefully. Just checking. That was the first moment I felt something real shift inside me, because now it wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence, something that seemed aware of the same boundary I was standing in front of. My phone vibrated again. Same number. Second message. He is already inside. I stood there reading it without moving, because I suddenly couldn't decide what I was supposed to do with that information, and I remember thinking how strange it is that words can feel heavier than physical objects when they arrive at the wrong time. And then, very clearly, I heard my name. From inside my apartment. Said calmly. Like someone who had been living there long enough to say it naturally. And that was the moment I stopped thinking about explanations completely. Because whatever was happening behind that door, it already knew I was standing outside it. After I heard my name from inside the apartment, I didn't move for a long time, because something in me refused to accept that it had actually happened, and I stayed in that strange state where your body is present but your mind is still trying to catch up, still trying to protect you from fully understanding what you just heard. I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been seconds, or it might have been longer, but eventually my phone rang again, and I answered it without thinking too much, because at that point not knowing felt worse than anything I could hear. The same unknown number. But this time there was a voice. Calm, steady, almost careful. She told me not to open the door under any circumstances, and I immediately asked who she was, but she didn't answer directly. She only said she was aware of what was happening inside my apartment. I asked what she meant by that, and there was a short pause before she said something that didn't fully make sense at first. She said that someone had entered my apartment earlier, and that it had not left. I told her that wasn't possible, because I had been out all day, and nothing had been wrong when I left, but she said that this didn't matter anymore, because whatever entered wasn't tied to time in a normal way. I remember looking at my door again, and suddenly noticing how completely still it was, like even the faintest usual sounds of my apartment were gone, and instead there was just a heavy, controlled silence. Then I heard movement again, but this time it was clearer. Slow steps. Measured. Like someone walking across my living room very deliberately, not rushing, not hiding, just moving as if they belonged there. The woman on the phone told me to stay away from the door and not interact with it directly, and I asked her what I was supposed to do instead, and she said I needed to listen without reacting, because reacting would confirm presence. That sentence stayed in my head for a moment, because it didn't feel like something you say in a normal situation, but at that point nothing about the situation felt normal anymore. Then everything inside my apartment stopped again. No steps. No movement. Just silence. But this time the silence felt different. It felt focused. Like something had paused because it was listening too. And then I heard something very soft. A key turning inside the lock. Slowly. Carefully. From the inside. I stepped back without realizing it, and my back hit the wall behind me in the hallway, and I remember feeling trapped not by space, but by the realization that the boundary I trusted most in my life was now being tested from the other side. The woman on the phone said very quietly that I should not panic, and that I should not look through the peephole, because what I see might not match what is actually there. And then the lock clicked again. The door didn't open fully, but it moved slightly inward. Just enough to show me that whatever was inside was not guessing anymore. It was choosing. And in that moment, I finally understood what I had been avoiding since the beginning. This wasn't an intrusion. It was a misunderstanding I had been living inside without realizing it. Because the voice I heard from inside spoke again. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just tired. It said my name again, and then it said something I didn't expect at all. I'm sorry I'm late. I had to make sure you were still you. And suddenly everything stopped making sense in a different way, not because it became scarier, but because it became personal. The woman on the phone exhaled quietly and told me that it was over now, that the situation was not what I thought it was, and that I should open the door slowly. I hesitated. But I did. I turned the key, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The apartment was completely normal. Empty. Quiet. But on the table near the entrance, there was my spare key. And beside it, a note written in my own handwriting. It said, very simply, that I had been locking myself out of my own home for months in different states of stress without remembering it properly, and that every time it happened, I left myself messages so I wouldn't panic when I finally noticed. I stood there holding the door open, reading it again and again, realizing that there was no stranger, no intrusion, no unknown presence. Only me. Trying, in my own way, to make sure I didn't lose track of myself when I came back.